I've rewritten Part 1 while preserving the same pacing, structure, and approximate length as the original, with fresh wording for originality. I paid cash for 600 acres of empty desert. No neighbors, no restrictions, no one looking over my shoulder telling me what I could or couldn't do. At least, that's what I believed. 3 weeks after the sale was complete, a letter arrived in my mailbox from a homeowners association I'd never joined, for a community that technically didn't even exist yet. That single envelope changed everything. Before we get any further into this story, I want to know where you're watching from. Leave your country down in the comments. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories reach. And if you haven't subscribed to HOA Revenge Stories yet, now's the perfect time. Hit that subscribe button because what happened after this only gets more unbelievable. I'd spent nearly 10 years saving for this purchase. Not for a bigger house, not for a new vehicle, for land. Real, untouched land, where nobody could tell me what color my fence had to be, or complain if my grass got a little too high. Eventually, I found it through an online land auction, 600 acres of raw desert nearly 3 hours from the closest traffic light, listed at a price that honestly seemed far too low. My friends thought I was completely out of my mind. My family was convinced I was going through some strange midlife crisis at just 34 years old. But I wasn't making a reckless decision. I'd done my homework. The property was zoned for agricultural use. It wasn't inside any subdivision. Every county record I checked confirmed there wasn't a homeowners association connected to the parcel. I still remember standing at the property line for the very first time, watching dust swirl around my boots in the desert wind. I looked across all that open space and thought, this is finally mine. Nobody else gets a say. I couldn't have been more wrong. And I had absolutely no idea just how wrong until 3 weeks later. Closing day felt like winning the lottery. I signed the paperwork inside a tiny title office that smelled permanently of burnt coffee, shook hands with a broker who kept referring to the property as a blank canvas, then drove straight out there that same afternoon, just so I could stand on land that officially belonged to me. 600 acres. For comparison, that's roughly the size of 450 football fields, made up of nothing but sand, scattered brush, and silence so complete you could almost hear your own heartbeat. I spent my first night sleeping in a tent near the spot where I planned to build my future homestead. I lay there staring at more stars than I'd ever seen in my entire life. I already knew exactly what I wanted: a small off-grid cabin, a private well, solar panels, eventually a few utility buildings for equipment. Nothing extravagant, just something that was completely mine, built exactly the way I wanted it. No committees, no permission forms, no busybody neighbors peeking over fences that hadn't even been built yet. I remember thinking this was probably the only purchase I'd ever make that came with complete, uncomplicated freedom. Hold on to that thought for a moment, because it was about to disappear. And the reason why was stranger than anything I could have imagined. Exactly 3 weeks after closing, I drove back out to inspect some fencing materials I'd had delivered. Sitting neatly on top of the stack, protected inside a clear plastic sleeve from the desert wind, was a cream-colored envelope stamped with an embossed logo. It looked official before I even opened it. The sender was the Sundown Ridge Property Owners Association. I'd never heard that name before. I immediately checked my closing documents again. Nothing. Then I searched the county assessor's records. Still nothing. According to every official record I could find, no homeowners association had any legal authority over my parcel. Yet the letter knew exactly which property belonged to me. It listed Lot 14, Section C, my exact parcel, and outlined community regulations covering building designs, fence heights, approved exterior colors, and something called an architectural review fee, demanding $2,500, payable within 30 days. I actually laughed. There I was, standing alone in the middle of 600 acres of empty desert, holding a letter insisting I needed permission to build a fence from an organization that, according to every public record available, didn't legally exist. What I didn't realize was that this letter was only the opening move. The truth behind it would drag me into a rabbit hole involving a shell company, a land deal that was nearly a decade old, and one familiar name I never expected to encounter again. I did what almost anyone would have done. I called the number printed on the letterhead. A woman answered. She sounded pleasant enough, but there was a E4.
As I flipped through the final pages of the binder, one detail immediately caught my attention. Tucked into the back was a signature page bearing a single name that didn't match any of the board members sitting across the table from me. At the time, it seemed like a minor curiosity, but I'd eventually discover that name was far more important than I ever imagined. I walked out of that meeting with more questions than answers, and before 2 weeks had passed, the situation escalated dramatically. Another envelope showed up. This one wasn't introducing the HOA. It was a formal violation notice. According to the letter, I constructed an unauthorized structure. They were referring to the small tools shed-eyed placed on the property to keep my fencing equipment out of the weather. Their penalty was simple: $500 every single day until the shed was either removed or approved by the association. The problem was I hadn't violated any actual law. The county didn't require permits for a structure that size on agricultural property, but the HOA quoted its own internal rulebook as though it carried the same legal authority as county regulations. Then things became even more ridiculous. A certified letter arrived threatening to place a lien against my property if I refused to pay the accumulating fines. That made absolutely no sense. I owned the land outright, no mortgage, a clean title, no legal claims against it whatsoever. Instead of panicking, I started talking to other property owners nearby. Most of them had purchased undeveloped parcels within the previous year. Almost every single one had received nearly identical letters, different parcel numbers, the same architectural review fee, the same impossible deadline, the same intimidating language. That's when my mind went back to the signature I'd seen in the binder. I searched the name through publicly available records. What I found connected this so-called Property Owners Association to both a company and an individual who had already faced lawsuits in a neighboring county over almost the exact same scheme. According to court filings, the man whose name appeared on that signature page had developed a predictable pattern. He would acquire large sections of remote, undeveloped land. After individual buyers purchased nearby parcels, he would quietly create an HOA, sometimes years after the original subdivision had already taken place. His strategy depended on one thing. He hoped new landowners wouldn't realize the association had no legal authority over deeds that had already been recorded. Court records showed that judges in 2 separate lawsuits had already ruled against similar associations because they were created after buyers had taken ownership, without any HOA covenant ever being included in the original deeds. The legal principle was straightforward. If an HOA didn't exist when you purchased your property, and your deed never obligated you to join one, it generally couldn't be forced onto your land later. Wanting complete certainty, I ordered another copy of my title report. Then I hired an experienced real estate attorney to examine every single page. A few days later, I received a written legal opinion. My deed contained no HOA covenants, no restrictive agreements, no obligations to any homeowners association, past, present, or future. At that point, everything finally made sense. This organization wasn't protecting neighborhood standards. It wasn't preserving property values. It had been created almost entirely on paper for one purpose: to pressure unsuspecting landowners into paying fees for an association that had no legitimate authority over them. And I had no intention of letting it continue. Through my attorney, I sent a formal cease and desist letter spelling everything out in plain language. No recorded covenant, no HOA authority, no valid lien. Then I contacted the other landowners who had received similar notices. Together, we did something the association clearly hadn't anticipated. We started comparing every document publicly. We created a shared file containing every letter, every violation notice, Every fine, every threat, and every contradiction between what the HOA claimed and what county records actually showed. Within a month, 5 additional property owners had joined our effort. One of them happened to be a paralegal. She helped organize the entire timeline into a detailed, chronological paper trail that was impossible to ignore. Armed with that evidence, we filed complaints with the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, arguing that the association appeared to be fraudulently soliciting money from landowners. At the same time, we petitioned to have the HOA's governing documents officially declared unenforceable as they related to our parcels, since those documents had been recorded after we bought our land and were unsupported by any legally binding covenant. The pressure worked faster than any of us expected. Within weeks, the board secretary stopped returning phone calls. The small strip mall office suddenly closed for renovations. The letters stopped arriving. The daily fines disappeared. Even that little office with the half-erased grocery list on the whiteboard quietly vanished from the picture. But that wasn't where the story truly ended. The final chapter traced everything back to the very first envelope that landed in my mailbox. Several months later, my attorney uncovered one last filing. Without any public announcement, the association had officially dissolved. The timing wasn't a coincidence. It happened shortly after the Attorney General's office opened its inquiry. In the end, none of fines had ever been legally enforceable. No valid lien was ever recorded, and that thick binder full of governing documents had never possessed any legal authority over my land in the first place. Today, those 600 acres look exactly the way I imagined on that first night beneath the stars. Peaceful, quiet, completely mine. The small off-grid cabin now stands exactly where my tent once sat, and every time I walk outside, I'm reminded why I bought the land in the first place. But there's one final twist. The same individual whose name appeared on that signature page has resurfaced under a brand new property owners association operating 3 counties away, targeting another group of unsuspecting landowners. So if you want to see how that investigation unfolds and how we're already helping expose it, make sure you're subscribed to HOA Revenge Stories